What if everything you knew about God just stopped? No warning, no explanation, no transition, just silence. In ancient Israel, that's exactly what happened. For generations, the people were used to something consistent. Even if it wasn't constant miracles every day, there was still a rhythm. God spoke through prophets. Warnings were given. Direction was clear. History had meaning. Then one day, it stopped. Not for a short period, not for a difficult season, but for over 400 years. And here's what makes that number terrifying. 400 years means entire. Civilizations of families lived and died without hearing a new word from a prophet of God. Children were born, grew up, had children of their own, and died, all under silence. No new prophetic voice entered the nation to explain what God was doing. The last known voice was the prophet Malachi. He delivered a message that wasn't comforting. It was sharp. It was corrective. It warned Israel that judgment was coming, but also hinted that something greater was ahead. And then, nothing followed. No continuation of the message. No clarification. No timeline. Just an ending that felt unfinished. At first, people may have assumed it was temporary. Maybe God would speak again soon. Maybe another prophet would rise in a few years. But years turned into decades. Decades turned into generations. And generations turned into centuries. Still silence. And in that silence, something began to shift inside the people of Israel. Outwardly, life continued. They still went to the temple. They still offered sacrifices. They still followed the law of Moses. But inwardly, something heavier was growing. A quiet uncertainty. A question no one wanted to say out loud. If God is still with us, why does it feel like he is no longer speaking? And once that question enters a nation, everything starts to change. Faith becomes routine. Ritual replaces revelation. Tradition continues, but without fresh direction. And slowly, people stop expecting God to speak again. Not because they stop believing in him, but because silence, over time, begins to feel like an answer. But what they didn't realize was this. Silence is never empty. It is either absence or preparation. And during those 400 years, while Israel struggled with the weight of unanswered questions, the world outside their borders was already beginning to shift in ways they could not yet understand. Because when heaven goes silent, it doesn't mean history stops moving. It usually means something far bigger is already in motion. And Israel was about to discover that silence is never the end of the story. It is only the beginning of something they never saw coming. While Israel sat under centuries of silence, something unsettling was happening outside its borders. The world was not slowing down. It was accelerating. Old empires that once felt permanent began to weaken from within. Power was shifting faster than anyone could predict. And the political map of the ancient world was starting to look unstable, like something large was being rearranged behind the scenes. Then, almost suddenly, a name emerged that would reshape everything. Alexander, a young ruler no one expected to dominate history the way he did. At first, he was just another ambitious leader in a divided world. But what followed didn't behave like normal warfare. It moved like speed itself had taken human form. Kingdom after kingdom fell, not after long resistance, but in rapid succession. Cities that expected years of siege collapsed in far less time. Entire regions were absorbed into a growing empire that seemed to expand faster than anyone could respond. It didn't feel like slow political change. It felt like a global shockwave. But conquest was only the surface. What Alexander spread was far more permanent than territory. Where his influence reached, Greek language followed, not by force alone, but through administration, trade, education, and everyday survival. Slowly, something extraordinary began to happen across the ancient world. People from different nations could finally communicate, not perfectly, not peacefully, but clearly enough to trade ideas, conduct business, and share knowledge across borders that once made communication impossible. For the first time in history, distance mattered less than before. And that changed everything. Philosophy spread faster. Culture mixed more deeply. New ways of thinking began to challenge old traditions. Even Israel could not stay untouched, though it still held tightly to its identity. It now existed inside a larger system where Greek language and ideas were becoming unavoidable. Everyday life slowly began to reflect a world that was no longer isolated, but interconnected. And this created tension beneath the surface. Because when cultures collide, identity gets tested. What once felt stable began to feel pressured. What once felt pure began to feel contested. And what once felt separate began to feel exposed to influence from every direction. Then, just as quickly as he rose, Alexander was gone. No long reign, no gradual decline, no clear transition of power, just an abrupt ending that left the world stunned. And what he left behind was not unity, but division. His empire split into competing kingdoms, each ruled by his generals, each fighting for control over what he had built. So instead of stability, the world entered a new phase, a connected world, without peace, a unified language, without unified leadership, a global system, without balance. And Israel found itself caught in the middle of this unstable new order, pressured from every side, influenced from every direction, but still waiting in silence for God to speak. And yet, through all of this global transformation, one truth remained unchanged. Heaven still said nothing, but the silence was no longer feeling empty. It was starting to feel intentional. By the time empires had risen and fallen around them, Israel was no longer just dealing with silence from heaven. Something else was happening now, something quieter, but far more dangerous. The silence was beginning to shape how they understood God. Without prophets to guide them, interpretation of Scripture became the center of everything. And slowly, different ways of understanding God's law started to form inside the nation. At first, these differences seemed small, but over time, they became dividing lines. Because when there is no new voice from heaven, people begin to build systems around what they already have. And those systems don't always agree. One group rose with a strong focus on strict obedience and detailed application of the law. They believed that if Israel could just get everything exactly right, restoration would come. Every rule mattered. Every tradition mattered. Nothing could be ignored or softened. Another group grew closer to political and religious authority, focusing on preserving stability under foreign rule. For them, survival meant compromise, structure, and control within the system that already existed. And then there were the scholars, those who dedicated themselves to studying, preserving, and interpreting every detail of the Scriptures. Their influence grew because, in a silent era, understanding the text became more important than hearing a new word. These groups did not emerge overnight. They formed slowly, over generations of silence. And what began as different approaches to faith gradually hardened into identity, authority, and power. Because when heaven is silent long enough, interpretation becomes influence, and influence becomes conflict. Now Israel was no longer just a nation waiting for God. It had become a nation debating God. Different voices, different conclusions, different expectations, and all of it happening without a single prophetic interruption to bring correction or clarity. That absence changed everything. Because without a living, guiding voice, religion began to shift from revelation into structure. And structure, once established, starts to defend itself, even against truth. But beneath all of this internal division, something deeper was forming. Israel was becoming more organized than ever before, but also more fragmented in spirit. Outwardly, it still looked like one people, but inwardly, it was splitting into camps that would shape its future long after the silence ended. And yet, even with all this internal tension, one thing remained unchanged. No prophet, no warning, no clarification, just silence continuing. While the system inside the nation became more complex, more rigid, and more divided. But Israel didn't realize something crucial. This internal breaking was not random. It was preparing the stage for a completely different kind of message, one that would not fit into any of the systems they were building. And when that message finally came, it would challenge everything they had structured during the silence. By this point in history, nothing looked spiritual on the surface. No prophets were speaking. No obvious miracles were happening. No clear divine intervention could be seen. But underneath the surface, the world was being reshaped with precision. Another empire rose to dominance, Rome. And unlike the empires before it, Rome didn't just expand through conquest. It built systems. Roads stretched across continents, connecting distant regions in ways the ancient world had never experienced before. Travel became faster, safer, and more predictable. What once took months of dangerous journeying could now be done with far more stability under Roman control. Laws were standardized. Governance became structured. Order replaced constant instability. For the first time, the known world began to feel connected in a practical way. But something even more important was happening beneath all of this structure. A shared language system had already begun to take root from earlier Greek influence. Now, with Roman stability layered on top, communication across nations became even more effective. Ideas could travel, messages could spread, information could move farther than ever before. And then came another quiet but powerful shift. The scriptures of Israel were translated into Greek. This meant something profound. What was once locked within a single nation and language was now accessible to a much wider world. Without realizing it, the ancient world was being prepared for global communication at a level it had never seen before. But it wasn't just language and politics. It was timing. Everything was aligning at once. A unified communication system, a structured global empire, safer travel routes, cross-cultural exposure, shared legal and administrative frameworks. It looked like progress, but no one understood what it was preparing for. Because all of these systems, roads, language, governance, translation, were not isolated developments. They were converging, moving toward a single moment in history that no one in that time period could yet recognize. And through all of it, one thing remained unchanged. Heaven was still silent. No explanation, no interruption, no prophetic commentary, just a world being quietly arranged like pieces on a board. And the strange part was this: the more organized the world became, the more it felt like it was being prepared for an arrival it didn't know it was expecting. Heaven did not speak. No prophets, no new revelations, no public divine messages, just silence stretching across generations. And by this point, many had stopped expecting anything to change. But then, something happened that shattered that long-standing silence. It didn't begin with crowds. It didn't begin with kings. It didn't begin with war or empire. It began quietly. Inside a temple, a priest named Zechariah was serving before God, carrying out his duties like every other day in a system that had learned to function without prophetic interruption. Nothing unusual was expected. But then everything changed. An angel appeared, and for the first time in centuries, heaven was no longer silent. A message was spoken directly into history again. Zechariah was told that he and his wife would have a son in their old age. But this child was not ordinary. His name would be John, and his purpose would not be to build an empire, or lead a nation, or establish a system. His purpose was simple, but explosive: to prepare the way. That moment marked something the world had not experienced in generations. The silence was breaking, not with chaos, not with confusion, but with precision, because everything that had happened during those 400 years, the empires rising, the languages spreading, the roads being built, the religious systems forming, was not random history. It was preparation. And now, it was becoming clear why. The world had been shaped in silence so that when the voice returned, it would not fall on an unprepared world. John would become the first sign that the long silence was ending. And after him, everything would accelerate. But here is what makes this moment so powerful. For 400 years, people wondered if God had stopped speaking. But in reality, he had been preparing the stage for the most important message the world would ever hear. And now, the silence was over. Not because God returned, but because the moment had finally arrived. If this story opened your eyes to how God can be silent but still working behind the scenes, don't just scroll past this. Take a moment and reflect. Have you ever mistaken silence for absence? Drop a comment and share one thing this story made you think differently about. And if you want more hidden truths from Scripture explained in a way that actually makes sense, then hit the subscribe button, because there's a lot more coming on Bible Stories Explained channel. God bless you.